So yeah, that word. Well, it's like this is the case with Hebrew always. Is the words the semantic range is like crazy.
Yeah. Do you know about this, Nick? I don't think there's any way you would. So when you get to seminary, if you're taking Hebrew, they tell you which dictionary to buy. There is a Hebrew dictionary that all religious and biblical scholars use. It's called the Brown Drivers Briggs. And it's just like it's not that it's a normal dictionary size book. Like it's a big book. But it has at first, I think most people just think, oh, it's just a dictionary. Like it's got all the Hebrew words in it, and I'll look them up and find them. What you eventually realize is that it's specifically like it's for the Bible. So it not only it has all the words that are used in the Bible, and in each entry, it lists every time it's used, unless it's a word that's used like thousands of times, then it's just like, etc. But if it's a word that's only used 5 times in the whole Hebrew scriptures, like they're all listed there, often with a different definition for each time. So it's like, it means this in this verse and this in this verse. And it's like, how do you know?
Right,
You're
yeah.
just making it up.
So the root means to defend, deliver, escape,
Plunder. Like these are not the
preserve,
same thing.
recover, rescue, save, spoil, strip, snatch away.
These. Hi, everybody. My name is Evan.
And I'm Scott.
We're both Baptist pastors, and this is our podcast about the Bible. But you don't have to worry, because we're not here to save your souls. We won't be telling you what to believe or how to behave, and we promise never to invite you to church. We just like to talk about the Bible, what it actually says, where it probably came from, and how it's been understood or not by different people in different times and places. This is your warning, though, especially if you are or have been a person of faith. For our purposes during this podcast, the Bible's not a sacred text. We'll be treating the Bible more or less like any other book. While you're here, there's nothing you have to believe. There are no beliefs you can't question, and there are no questions you can't ask. Welcome to the unHoly Bible Study Podcast. Scott, we're starting a new mini-series today. So all of our episodes so far have just been kind of one-off, not really linked together. We've just picked some interesting things we wanted to talk about or some meaningful chapters from the Bible that looked interesting to us. But the topic of names came up a couple weeks ago during one of our conversations, and we decided that it was worth exploring that topic a little bit more and kind of linking some episodes together to talk about some different names in the Bible. So we won't cover all the names in the Bible, obviously, or all the times when names matter in different Bible stories or readings. But we've picked a few really significant names from the scriptures that we wanted to highlight over these next several episodes. What is it when you think about names in the Bible? What do you think about, or why does that feel significant?
One of the things, there are so many stories of name changes.
Right. That's when it came up. It was Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel in Genesis.
Well, it's a significant part of the biblical narrative. There are so many examples, both the Hebrew Bible and New Testament, where somebody gets a name change, and that you can't really understand those stories if you don't understand the significance of the name change. So like Abraham was Abram before. There's the significance to that new name. Paul was Saul before. So I think it not only just is interesting as a personal fact about that individual, but it often is associated with what God wants that person to do or who God is calling that person to be.
Yeah. Names, like once things start getting written down, like names in and of themselves are significant and meaningful in lots of ways. But then as soon as you start writing things down, names take on extra significance, right? Because you're thinking about them not just as that's what I shout when I want somebody's attention, but this is like the you become conscious of the meanings and the connections between people with this name. Like I think it's always pretty significant in a piece of literature when somebody picks a name or what a character's name is.
It's interesting. So my full name is David Scott Smith. So my first name is David, but my mom decided she wanted me to be called Scott. But
was that after you were born? Like, did she know that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Are you named after someone?
No. She just, that was, I think that was her choice. But what was interesting is all through my life, like even in school, when the teacher, you're in a new class and the teacher goes through the roll for the first time, David Smith is who they call. And, that's me.
Yeah.
So it's, Scott is associated with my identity.
Yeah.
Existentially.
Does anybody call you David?
If I get a phone call and they say, "Is David there?" I know.
They just got your name off a list.
Yeah. So it's handy in that way. But having that experience, it makes you aware of how names work, because I don't identify myself as David. It's part of my name. Yeah. And so names are so tied to our identity, who we are. And then this idea of changing a name.
That's hard for you to imagine.
Like as an adult, if all of a sudden now I'm David for the rest of my life, that just feels weird to me. And I think it is such a powerful thing to change a name.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. That names do matter in some way. I agree. It's also really hard for me to imagine changing my name now as an adult. Like my first name, like that Evan is like so tied to my sense of self. Like that's what I am. That's who I am.
The other thing is,
but then it's always fit. Like I do think of people like when I think of name changes now, I often think of transgender people or people who've gone through other transitions in their life. And I think there's something fortunate about never having had to ask the question. Like my name always fit, but names do come with like a history. Names are often tied, are one of the few words in English, especially, that really often has a gender associated with it. So they do mean something, right? Like they mean more than just that's what I write on the form when I fill out my name.
It's interesting. So I have special names for both of my grandsons. My oldest, his special name is Mr. Chips. And then the younger one is Muffin Man. And the older one, especially Mr. Chips, his name is Max. But it's important to him that I call him Mr. Chips, at least some of the time. That name, it also for him it says something about our relationship.
Yeah. Nicknames are where you really feel it, right? Like, I know you well enough. I know your birth name and like your real name, but this is my name for you. Yeah. And then even when you do use it or when you don't use it, like it means something. Like you think of the example of like the parent who uses your full name when they're angry. And normally just calls you by a shortened version or a nickname or something like that.
I remember when Max was young, I watched him 5 days a week for a couple of years. And I don't remember exactly how old, 3 or 4, probably around in there. But if we were outside and met a neighbor or something, he would say, "My name is Max, and my name's Duck." That's
Yeah.
what my grandkids call me. But he'd say, but my grandpa calls me Mr. Chips.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. You always tell them that that's what my grandpa calls me.
Yeah.
So yeah, names, they're important to us.
I think so, yeah. And certainly important in the Bible. And we thought that would be an interesting thing to talk about here for these next few weeks. So we've got some things lined up. We don't know, we have not totally decided on the scope of the miniseries, but we have some things we definitely want to talk about, and then some passages that are maybe a little more on the bubble. And if we're still interested in this 5 weeks from now, I guess we might do a few more episodes. But
there's one we ought to do that's not in the Bible. I want to know why Frank Zappa named one of his kids Moon Unit.
I didn't know he had.
Moon Unit Zappa.
Do you think we can find an answer to that question?
I don't know. It was
Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
Frank Zappa could do what he wants.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's well, celebrity names, like celebrities often give their kids weird names, right?
Mm-hmm.
More so, is that more common for celebrities, or do a lot of people give their kids weird names and we just never hear about it?
I think there are plenty of weird names out there. Yeah.
I bet that's true. So we are starting this series with the big one, not the name of a person, but the name of God, which is revealed early on in the Bible, and then it's revealed again. And the passage we're looking at today comes from the book of Exodus. We're talking about Exodus chapter 3. And this is the first time, I think I'm right, this is the first time that God actually says God's name in the Bible.
Yeah, it's part of the narrative in Genesis, but the name is used.
Yeah.
That what we, in at least in seminary, we called it the tetragrammaton, which just means 4 letters. YWHW.
Yeah, and I think it's worth taking 5 minutes to do kind of throw down some brackets and say, like, the name of God is really significant when people study the Bible, because it was one of the first signs, and I don't think we've talked about this. It was one of the first signs that different people had written the Bible, or that the Old Testament was assembled out of different strands of written material that were later kind of edited and stitched together. And one of the signs that scholars started to look for was how God was named, or what how the writers referred to God. So we have different names. Often when the Hebrew Bible refers to God, it just says Elohim, which is kind of the generic. It's like the word God, which we could use meaning God, capital G, the only God, the Christian God, the Jewish God, whatever we mean when we say that. Or we might just use it more generically. It could mean any of a category of divine beings. But then there's also the tetragrammaton, which are the 4 letters that make up, how would you describe this? Is it God's personal name?
Well,
is it God's first name, or is it something else?
I remember in seminary, I think the way one of my professors described it is that God's being evasive. God's not really even giving a name. When he says, my name is, but then what God provides isn't a name at all.
Yeah.
That it's kind of God being elusive and difficult to pin down.
Yeah. And in the Hebrew text, like if you were reading the Bible in Hebrew, it's called the tetragrammaton because it is literally 4 Hebrew letters. And when those in the Jewish tradition, still to this day, and for a long time, when the scriptures are read out loud, those letters are not pronounced. So if you were tracing along with the text, your finger would get to that word, and you would substitute another word
Adonai.
for the name of God, right? Adonai, which means Lord.
Right. Which is interesting. So a lot of people will use the name Jehovah. The King James,
Right. Yeah.
for the name of God comes up with Jehovah. And what that is it's an attempt to pronounce
Right.
YHWH. I mean,
Yeah.
YWHW. Or no, YHWH. And what it is in the Hebrew text. So the Hebrew text originally was only the consonants. There's no,
it's just those 4 letters,
right,
and you supply the vowels yourself.
right.
You have to know what they are.
But there's a group of Jews. I think it's like the 8th century, Common Era.
Yeah.
They, to help pronounce it, they put what they call vowel points.
Yes. This is the first time we've talked about the miniseries.
Yeah.
I think it is. And I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for this moment.
So what? So
they put little dots.
Right,
little
dots, dashes,
and arrows,
yeah, above and below
around the consonants to show you what vowels to pronounce.
What's interesting is when they get to the name of God, they put the vowel points. That's what you call them. They put the vowel points in for the word Adonai.
Right. Yeah, because that's what you pronounce.
That's what you
It's a signal.
Right. But if you try to combine the name of God, those 4 letters with those vowel points, it's kind of hard to pronounce because it's not a Hebrew word.
Yeah.
And what they came
the
up
vowels the Masoretes put in don't make any sense with those consonants.
But the attempt to pronounce it in English without knowing how that worked was Jehovah.
Yeah. So that's how the King James.
So
the translators didn't understand. They just weren't familiar with, which is just astounding. Like we're not the Christian translators of the Bible. We're not familiar enough with the Jewish tradition and Jewish practices to know how that word would be read, to know that those vowels don't belong. It's insane.
And I think it is the King James uses the word Jehovah. And what's interesting is how committed people get to that.
Like, people still.
That really is the name of God. Well, no, it isn't. Well, it is. But and actually, let's look at the text. Yeah. Let me show you how it works. Here's the vowel points. It's just interesting how we get.
It's like an English word that was invented 1,000 years after Jesus, more than 1,000 years after Jesus, and people still use it. Yeah. And this is, we started down this rabbit trail, and I'm so glad we did, because it's these names of God especially in the first 5 books of the Old Testament that signal who wrote it. We've identified, like scholars are fairly confident that those books were composed by stitching together various sources. One of them always calls God Yahweh, uses the Tetragrammaton. So in an English Bible, you'd know this because you recognize it. Usually it's set in a slightly different typeface. So if you're reading an English Bible and it says Lord, and it's all capital letters, but it's like small caps. There's a different typeface in almost every English translation.
It's the same principle, right? Because Adonai is Lord.
Yeah.
So we actually do the same thing. At least we don't say Yahweh. We say Lord.
Yeah.
But then it's signaled by how it's written.
Yeah. So like in the King James, it would say Jehovah. And in modern English translations, it says Lord, but it's written slightly differently. So that's a spot where the Tetragrammaton, the divine name, shows up.
And then in a phrase like the Lord my God, if it might be the actual word Adonai, Lord, and then it would be L, capital L, then Lil, O-R-D.
Yep.
So you can tell which.
There's almost always a signal of some kind. And there's a writer who always uses that name. Scholars debate over whether that name could have ever been pronounced. Like there are some people who say, no, like it was a God whose name was Yahweh. And that's probably how you'd pronounce those Hebrew consonants if they were together without different vowel points around them. Some people who say this is just a word that cannot be pronounced. Like that's the whole point, is it's not a name. Yahweh is just a couple of nonsense syllables that scholars invented 2,000 years later. And I don't think there's any real consensus. I think the most sensitive way to approach it is to not say that name very often. So I should stop.
Yeah, well, and
Have I ever told you this? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Talking. When I first came to First Baptist, there was this song, which was a perfectly lovely song. Like, it was kind of fun to sing. It was like a contemporary Christian song. I can't remember what it was called. I don't want to be too mean about it. But the chorus was like literally, Yahweh, Yahweh, we love to shout your name, O Lord. And every time we did it, I was like, I don't think that's...
I sure hope there aren't any.
Like, I hope God doesn't mind this, and I sure hope we don't have any Jewish neighbors sitting here just horribly offended by our shouting.
For Jews, one of the reasons that they don't say the name of God, it's an effort to avoid idolatry. Because if you say the name of God, it becomes definitional. It's like saying my name's Scott. I know, that's who specifically that is. But if you never say that name, it kind of leaves things open, right?
Right.
In my experience with Jewish friends through the years, that commitment to anti-idolatry is so significant. Yeah. One that I think Christians really don't appreciate a lot.
I think that's definitely true. And I think there's something positive about that. There's some, that fear of God, or that sense that the God is something that can't be approached or looked at or named. I think the Christian tradition purposefully kind of broke down that wall and said, God crossed that barrier. God became personal and was incarnate in the world. So you can kind of set aside this fear about, or this sense of, that you have to creep into the presence of God. But then it also becomes too casual. Like, it's kind of absurd. Like, we love to shout your name. Oh God, don't shout God's name. I don't think you really want God to show up just in case he's mad.
But also because of the Hebrew word that's used, and we'll see it in the text here, but it's based on the verb to be. In English, be, is, was, were, all that. It's that verb, and because it's a verb, it's hard to you can't pinpoint it. You can't objectify it.
Yeah,
it's fluid. It's
not a name like other names. Like, it's hard to pin down. Like, in English, we would think of like tense or voice, and those things are kind of ambiguous. In Hebrew, like, is it? And we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
A little bit
So
more. We've got 1,000 tangents going right now.
It prevents us from objectifying God, I think. And when you're singing a song like Yahweh, 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 we love to shout your name, it makes me wonder, like, what's going on in the brain? Yeah. First of all, just to say Yahweh, it doesn't register as this is the verb to be.
Yeah.
Because it's a different language.
Yeah. It's just kind of like, why do we love to shout this? Like, is it just fun to say? Yeah, I think that was most of it. This is kind of fun. I know we've chased down 100 different tangents in the last few moments, or the last few minutes. But there is, so in those first few books of the Old Testament, there's a source which always uses the divine name, the Tetragrammaton. You'll see Lord, and that's one of the signals that this is part of that tradition. Often, if I'm remembering correctly, scholars refer to this source as Y or the Yahwist, because that's the name it always uses. And often, like, that source talks about God in really personal terms. Like, this is God walking in the Garden of Eden, and kind of interacting directly with the characters from the book of Genesis, for instance. There's another source that always uses the name. I think I have this right. You might have to correct me if I'm wrong. There's another source that always uses the word Elohim,
Correct.
Always says God, until this moment in the text, when God tells Moses. So the chapter we're looking at today is the story of God appearing to Moses way out in the wilderness when Moses is tending some sheep, which is a very biblical thing for Moses to be doing. And God reveals the divine name to Moses. And this is the first time that Tetragrammaton, that name, appears in the source we know as E, who's been characterized up to this point by talking about God in totally different terms. Always the generic word God. It's just God. God's up in heaven doing stuff, and we're down here. But now the worlds are kind of combining, and God's becoming still vague and transcendent, like mysterious and hard to pin down. But it's this moment where that transcendent, generic God becomes a little more personal in the text. It's a cool moment.
Yeah.
We've mentioned Moses. What do people need to know about Moses? Key figure in the history of the Jewish people, one of the most important figures in the Old Testament.
He looks a lot like Charlton Heston.
He does, yeah. It was great casting. Lucky that Heston was around and willing to play the role. Yeah. An early leader of the Jewish people, often associated in the Jewish mythology or the history of ancient Israel. He's associated with the Exodus, the escape from Egypt. The name of this book is Exodus, and
the lawgiver,
refers to them coming out. Moses is the prophet who received the law, the Torah, from God, the writer of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, traditionally, even though those books narrate Moses' death for hundreds and thousands of years. Still today, many people believe that Moses is the one who wrote, kind of by hand, the first 5 books of the Bible. Most scholars don't think that's probably the case anymore, but that's what the tradition says. And Moses is an interesting figure because he's a Hebrew. So he was born to a Jewish mother, part of a Jewish family. The people of Israel had migrated to Egypt years before the story of Joseph is told at the end of the book of Genesis. The Hebrew people, Jacob's family, migrates to Egypt to escape a famine, and they stay there in a position of privilege and safety. For a long time, they're under the protection of the Pharaoh, but that Pharaoh dies, another Pharaoh replaces him, and this Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph, doesn't know who the Hebrew people are, and the story goes that they became slaves. They were oppressed. They were a minority people living in a foreign country and forced to do hard labor in terrible conditions, subject to genocide. The beginning of the book of Exodus is incredibly violent, and Moses kind of escapes, is preserved, is saved by the ingenuity of his family and the providence of God, and ends up being raised by the family of Pharaoh. So he's Hebrew, living in an Egyptian household, kind of caught between worlds, finds himself on the wrong side of the law, finds himself on the run. He flees to another country. He's living with his father-in-law, Jethro, his mother's father, Jethro. He's tending the sheep. And one day he's out there in the wilderness and he sees one of the most famous images in the Bible, a bush that's burning and is not consumed. Is this a story you remember from childhood?
Oh yeah, yeah. The flannel graphs of
Yeah, this is a big one.
the
This one's
baby,
fun.
the baby Moses in the little
Oh, the basket.
in the basket.
Yeah, that's a big one too.
Yeah, but I can't remember what our felt burning bush looked like, but yeah, all those biblical stories.
Yeah, this is a big one for animation,
Yeah.
for drawing the pictures,
Mhm.
illustrating it.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, Moses. I mean, Moses is central in Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Well known figure.
Yeah, kind of the central. Is that? I think that's fair to say the central prophet.
Well, Abraham and Moses, I would say, are up there together, number 1 and 2. I don't, depending on.
Yeah, it would be hard. I don't think you could say one is more central than the other. It just kind of depends where you're standing to look. Anything else? Any other background or context we need to talk through before we dive deeper into the text?
It's interesting. Moses doesn't have a name change, but he definitely goes through an identity change.
What are you thinking of?
Well, that he's essentially he's royalty, right? He's
yeah, it's not totally explored, but he's a prince,
right?
He's raised by the daughter of Pharaoh. There's some
in
sense
the palace.
that she adopts him.
Yeah. So and he goes from that to being a fugitive, a wanted man, and I think that's a drastic change in identity to be in like incredible privilege and power, and then you're running for your life.
Yeah.
And
then he ends up, I mean, this chapter is about the call to go back and to become like almost a legitimate political, religious figure on the other side of the fence. Like he's been in the palace. Now he's
this has struck me. He learned all about politics in the Pharaoh's household, so he had this skill set.
So. Yeah.
I'm sure he has absorbed a skill set that then when God called him, he would use that skill set to help liberate and lead this people.
Yeah, it is a fascinating. The narrative is compelling and interesting. Like there's a lot of material there in the wider story. Like this idea of the oppressed minority, and then the majority, the powerful class, like the royal family welcomes the oppressed minority in. And it's a story about assimilation. It's also a story about like the simmering resentment he must have felt. Like he's on the run because he murdered or killed an Egyptian who was mistreating a Hebrew slave. And yet he's not greeted as a hero or a liberator, at least to begin with, by the Hebrew people. He's kind of treated like a class traitor or like somebody who's abandoned his people for a life of privilege and power. It's fascinating. This particular chapter doesn't dive very deep into that, and a lot of that kind of happens on the edges of the story anyway, but it's fascinating backdrop.
So this, for me, the central part of this story that stands out is the whole business of God revealing his name to Moses.
Yeah, I think that's
and Moses asks, I need a name here, because I'm going to go and they're going to ask me.
They're going to ask who sent me. I've got to tell them.
Yeah. And yet the name that God gives Moses doesn't function as a name. It's not like he can go and say, well, this God.
And apparently not a name that anyone's heard before.
Right.
At least that's
so it's not going to be a recognizable name, right? Like, oh yeah, we know who that. No, they don't know who that is, and it's really hard, I think, for us because we're so familiar with the Bible to hear how strange this is. It's really a bizarre episode.
It is. And you saying that made me kind of reminded me that the whole idea is that Jacob's family, Abraham's family had this special relationship with God. But then it's kind of receded into the background. The people, their family has now become a nation, whatever that means, and they're living in a foreign land, like not the homeland God had promised to Abraham long ago. And they don't. It's not like they've cultivated and preserved this religious tradition. Like they're not crying out specifically to this God. They're just crying out for help. They are oppressed and want to be liberated. But it's not like they have this living tradition of the God of their ancestors who's going to come rescue them. It's kind of God initiates it from outside. And this is kind of the beginning of that process in the story. We're going to dive deeper, I think, but I think we'll take a quick break and then play Take It or Leave It and
Sounds
see
good.
where we go from there.
Okay.
We are back, and it's time to play Take It or Leave It. Scott.
Take it.
That's the good one, right?
You're right.
Yeah. So you like this.
This is...
I don't think there's, again, 2 episodes in a row. I don't think there's anything really offensive here.
Right.
Like, it's nice. I take this too. Yeah, I want this in my Bible.
And now I can't validate this claim, but this may be the most written about passage in human history.
And that's worth saying. Like, we try to review some of the scholarship and have some sense of what other people have said about each of these passages. I mean, it's impossible for almost any chapter in the Bible because there's so much written and said about it.
We're talking...
But this one is absurd.
We're talking 3,000 years plus of writing and contemplating and trying to figure
in
this
multiple
out.
different traditions.
Yeah.
And a really ambiguous story.
And there'll be plenty more written, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's just endlessly rich. The conversation will never end. But we'll contribute a little bit to it today. Let's see if we have anything to say about this. So we're unanimous. We're both going to take this. This can stay in our Bibles. What do you want to talk about first? Do you want to start with the name, or do you want to do some like lower hanging fruit? And then
what I would like to look at first is Moses says to God, and I don't have the verses here, but Moses says to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? I'm wondering, so Moses at this point, there wasn't really a scriptural tradition that Israel had, right?
No.
And Moses' only knowledge of God or gods was what he learned in Egypt.
I suppose so. Like, this is an open question, I think.
But is he saying, which God are you? Like, what is the question really? Like, of all the Egyptian gods, are you, Ammon? Are you Ra? Are you...
Yeah. Or some other that we don't remember, a Canaanite god?
It's a curious question he's asking, because you would think based on just Moses' life experience, his whole life was lived in a polytheistic environment. So to ask which one are you, what's your name, is unusual. But then I think that if he's asking for a specific name and then the reply that God gives is like, it upends the question.
I think so. God does not really probably does not answer the question that Moses is asking. And you touched on like the religious history of the people of Israel. I don't think we can really know like what Moses was taught about God. Like, we would have some sense that his education in Pharaoh's house would have been, and his religious practice would have been Egyptian religion, which we know a little bit about. I don't think we know anything about like what Hebrew religion looked like. Like they'd been in Egypt at this point for hundreds of years. Were they practicing religion the same way their Egyptian neighbors were? Did they bring practices with them from Canaan that have continued to evolve alongside? Are they worshiping some Canaanite gods? Are they still worshiping the gods of Abraham and Jacob? Like, do they remember anything about that?
Well, they make the golden calf, right?
Later.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is an Egyptian god.
And also a Canaanite god, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question. But there is an Egyptian god that's a bull, a cow. But yeah, that's I mean,
so like when
there couldn't have been
God,
I don't think there could have been a vibrant religious tradition among slaves in Egypt. I mean,
at least it would not have been.
It would have been underground.
It would have changed.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would have evolved significantly from whatever Joseph and Jacob's religious practice was. It's just, I'm thinking about as this story begins. So Moses is tending sheep out in the wilderness on Mount Horeb, which means nothing to us at this point, but the narrator tells us he's on the mountain of God. And they will come back to this mountain. It will be incredibly significant for them later, but it's where Moses just happens to be. He sees this bush that's burning, and the bush starts talking to him. God's speaking to him from out of the bush. And well, we'll talk about the taking off his sandals in a minute, because I was just noticing God introduces himself, calls to Moses. Moses says, "Here I am." And then God says, "I am the God of your father," which is a weird line. I'm the God of your father. We don't know anything about Moses' father. So we don't know, is he being generic? Is this like a generic phrase? Or did Moses' father actually worship the God of Jacob? We have no idea. Anyway, he says, "I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And we don't really know. Is Moses like, oh yeah, I know about that. Those names are familiar to me. Or is Moses thinking, what the hell? Like, who is that? And it's a fascinating moment. All Moses knows is to be afraid, because there's a bush that's flaming and it's talking to him. And God said it's holy ground.
Yeah, it's a totally unexpected, totally out of the blue experience of the way the text presents it.
Yeah, no sense that Moses is especially religious or like looking for God. It's just,
I think he's looking on maintaining a low profile.
yeah, he seems to be
That's his
not
main
looking
focus.
for God. Yeah. And this bush bursts into flames. A couple things I wanted to mention, just like briefly. I don't know that there's a lot to say about them. But there's a thread here that we've talked about a little bit before. So the first thing God says after getting Moses' attention is take off your shoes. So don't wear your dirty shoes on this ground, because it's holy. Take off your shoes. The place you're standing is holy ground. And then God introduces God's self as the God of Jacob, whatever, and Moses is afraid. Like Moses hides his face because he's afraid to look at God. And it's this idea that we talked about a lot in the Genesis 32 episode, that that the presence of God is a dangerous place to be.
And it leaves you
scary
awestruck.
Place to be. Yeah.
That idea of being awestruck, the only time I can think in my life of being awestruck was seeing the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, that's an example I've heard other people use.
Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, I've been a couple times.
But I just remember you can't compute what you're experiencing. You can't explain it. And you can't even take a picture of it that you can take back home.
Yeah, the pictures don't do it justice.
I mean, it's not an exact parallel, but this experience was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It would have been, and bizarre, out of the ordinary, rattling to the very being of Moses.
Yeah. I've heard people describe the Grand Canyon that way. I've heard people describe it as almost nauseating
Mm-hmm.
in its hugeness, or it like not even standing on the edge, just kind of standing anywhere where you can look into it triggers almost a sense of vertigo or awe. I don't experience it that way. I was trying to think like the solar eclipse last year. That was probably as close.
I remember feeling a very similar feeling. Yeah,
that's
and it was so long here.
Yeah,
that it gave you time to
of. This I feel like I've stepped into another world.
And going through that, you're like, oh, now I know why the ancients probably reacted to all this natural phenomenon
like
this way.
I knew exactly what was going to happen, and it still felt a little creepy, a little scary, kind of cool. I think I think if anybody ever takes me to space, I would feel that way. Like if I was standing on the moon, or just far enough from the Earth to feel like I was in space and not on the planet. I could imagine feeling that way then, like just a sense of the scale of the universe, of standing next to something totally unknowable. But maybe the ocean, like being over really deep water, I get a sense like that, that there are mysteries here I could never fathom or never get to the bottom of. Do you what's the right way to ask this question? Has God ever made you feel like that? Does that question even make sense? Like, have you ever had a really religious experience?
I've had a couple of experiences in life that I would say were mystical experiences, and one was a sermon. And
that you heard or preached?
No, that I preached, but it was the way that it came to me. I have my routine of creating a sermon. This one morning, it was a Sunday morning. I can't remember exactly what I had prepared, but I always got up around 5 on Sunday mornings and just spent a couple hours in quiet, just kind of trying to center myself. And in that moment, I had this experience. I didn't hear a voice or anything, but these words just flooded my mind. And I felt like I just had to write down everything that was coming to my mind, almost like automatic writing. And it was all about this, that I am the God of love. But it was the experience. It was like that idea was coming alive to me. Like I was, and it had this effect on me. And I remember like it continued to affect me the rest of the week after I preached. I shared what I wrote but then I remember stopping at a stoplight.
Did you know about how old you were? Like when in your life, or when
this would have been around 2002 or 3, somewhere around in there. I remember sitting at a stoplight. It was College in Kessler I was going north on College. I remember looking to my left and seeing a car and a couple people in the car. And I remember thinking, if you all knew how much God loved you, it's like this. It's like this.
That's really sweet.
Like it's like, ooh,
like it's overflowing.
Yeah. And that was probably the most powerful mystical experience I've ever had. And it was just this. I experienced something that I can't explain. But it was this overwhelming sense of what love is.
So not like a frightening feeling, kind of the opposite of.
I felt undone though.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good word.
I just like, I mean, it was
so
sort of that
overwhelming.
It was sort of like the Grand Canyon. I don't know if I can write these words, but I don't know if I can explain to anybody what's happening right now.
Yeah. Huh. Do you think it was This question might not be fair. Do you think that was because that way of thinking about or knowing God was so different than what you, even if you had by that point kind of intellectually set aside some of the fundamentalist ideas you'd grown up with? Still, that way of thinking about God is so opposed to like a typical evangelical or conservative Christian kind of idea that God's that primarily we should be afraid of God and God is going to punish us.
I
Was
don't
there
know that
something
it
there?
was I wouldn't say it was a theological change. It wasn't like the ideas that I experienced weren't different than ideas I was even preaching in my.
Yeah. No, I heard it not as an intellectual thing, but as like you were
Experience.
feeling it
Mhm.
in a way that was like sweeping away all the
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff you'd unconsciously carried from childhood or from early adulthood. That's probably what I was wondering.
It's interesting just sitting here thinking about it. I don't even know that in that moment I was like consciously associating it with the God of the Bible, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking, oh, this is Jesus talking to me or anything like that. It's just, I had this overwhelming experience of being blown away by this concept of radical love.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't even like, I knew this was an encounter with the divine, but I wasn't even thinking about, oh, like God and I are having this conversation. It was transcendent.
Yeah. Cool. So Moses was feeling like that.
I would imagine
Or
it.
something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. An overwhelming encounter with God. Anything, any other little things? I mean, I think we're going to talk for a while about God's name and that interaction. This is the first time the first time the phrase "the land flowing with milk and honey." So there's the promise here. God calls Moses over, the bush is burning, they're having this conversation, but the whole thing is God is sending Moses back. God is giving Moses a mission.
And because God heard the cry of his people, which they've been crying for 400 years. And my question is,
I love this. Yeah.
Why 400 years, God? Why did you decide to act then?
God was just waiting for somebody to come close enough to see the freaking bush.
Moses was the first qualified candidate.
That bush has been burning, actually, for 399 years.
Yeah.
Moses is the first person to get close enough who speaks a language that God can understand. Yeah. I genuinely think that's part of it. I mean, that's silly. But there is this sense that this is where God lives.
Mm-hmm.
And Moses, God says, like, I'm going to go with you. Like, obviously, as the narrative unfolds, God is still God in Egypt. But this is headquarters for God, right? Like, this is God's mountain.
There's a subtext to this even because every other God in human civilization at that time, they had a name, they had a job of that God, and they had a temple,
like geographical boundaries,
right?
Like,
and
this is my spot.
And that was all. I mean, the human beings came up with the names of these gods, and they built temples for these gods. Moses stumbles onto this God by accident, and there's not a building, there's not anything. So this God is like radically different than any other God in that humans.
Some other gods like to live on top of mountains, though.
Mm-hmm.
That's a godly thing to do.
Especially volcanoes. Gods like volcanoes.
Volcanoes, anything like weird or hard to get to. It's a good place for God to live. Yeah. But the mission, God has heard the cries, and he's sending Moses back. God is sending Moses back to lead the people out of slavery. And he's going to lead them back to the land of Canaan, which is not where this is happening. Like, this is out in the Sinai Peninsula, so kind of between Egypt and Canaan, which would be like present day Israel, present day Palestine. And the geography is weird. Like, God is here in the middle of nowhere where nobody lives, just waiting for somebody to come by who's up to the task. And Moses does not think he is, right? Moses says, who am I? Like, I can't do that. Has a list of excuses. Do we hear all the excuses here? Is this where we talk about Aaron? I don't think it is.
No.
That's the next chapter.
No,
right?
Moses struggles all along with this job.
Yeah, doesn't really want the job. If this was any other story, we would talk about the refusal of the call. This is like somebody gets a mission or there's a task that needs to be done, and the hero's first impulse is to say, no, that is not the job for me. And that's exactly what Moses says. And God doesn't care. God's decided that Moses is going to do this. And so it's like Moses really doesn't have much of a choice here.
Sort of Calvin's irresistible grace, right?
Yeah. Well, we talked about it with Mary too, like this sense that Mary is given this invitation or this call, and can you say no to God when God calls you or gives you a job to do? It doesn't seem like Moses really could. God tells Moses to go back, lead the people out. Even kind of gets into the details of it. God's like they're hatching a plot. Like, you're going to go to Pharaoh, tell him you're just going for a 3 days journey to worship God and bring the people back here. But God knows, Moses knows, you're not going back.
And at the very end of the story, I love it. The way that it's written, the way I would translate the whole my paraphrase would be, and this is how it's going to end up. The Egyptians are going to pay you to leave.
Yeah.
They're going to give you gold and silver and all kinds of stuff. You get the hell out of this place.
Yeah.
That's how it's going to happen.
Yeah. And the whole story is kind of, it's foreshadowed here. Like, God says exactly what's going to happen. You're going to go back, ask Pharaoh if you can leave. He's going to say no. And I'm going to, the plagues are what everybody knows about the book of Exodus. God sends all these awful plagues to terrorize the people of Egypt until Pharaoh finally lets the people of Israel go. And that's foreshadowed here. God says, that's what I'll have to do. You go ahead. I'm going to stay here. But when you need him, I'll send plagues so that eventually he'll set you free.
And then that is what the Jewish Passover is all about. It's celebrating that deliverance from Egypt. Yeah. Jesus was celebrating Passover before the crucifixion. The whole Moses narrative is central.
Yeah, as central, as important an idea as anything in the Jewish tradition. And one of the most important ideas in the Christian tradition as well. Moses asks, this is kind of the big central thing in this passage. God says, this is what you're going to do. Moses says, they're not going to listen to me. God says, it'll be fine. Moses said, who do I tell them sent me? If I just say the God of your ancestors, they're not going to know who I'm talking about. And we've talked about it a little bit, but this is where God reveals God's name. And it is translated oddly in a lot of English translations.
It's hard to translate.
Yeah,
I looked at it again in Hebrew, and it's an expanded form of the tetragrammaton, the 4 letters. It's an actual sentence, but it is so hard to capture. The New Revised Standard Version says, "I am who I am," and then you're supposed to say to them, "I am has sent you."
Yeah. So that's the first time. God says, I am who I am. Sometimes it's translated, I am that I am. Sometimes it's just translated, I am. It's the being verb.
It is the being verb doubled.
Yeah.
It's like I am being. I am being. I don't know. It's.
I mean, there's a lot of
I
really
am being
dorky
squared.
translations
Yeah.
of it. Like I'm the existing one. Like I've heard all kinds of dumb translations. They're not dumb. I'm sure they're fine. But people try to make sense out of this or try to express just how weird it is in the Hebrew. And I don't think you can get much better than I am who I am, which doesn't
not
really
a
make
name.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And the significance of that is, it's, at least the way I read it is, I'm not going to give you a name. I don't really have a name.
Yeah. So you read it as God's not being evasive. There is not a name behind it.
Right.
God doesn't have a name.
Right.
Yeah.
Which kind of, if you ponder it, sort of makes sense. It's, it almost seems silly that God would have a name. At least.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like God speaks English, or God speaks Hebrew, or God speaks whatever language we happen to.
Right.
Yeah.
But what happens, I think, is we lose that. We pray to God, we talk, in worship, we use names for God. And I don't know that this idea is like deep inside the Christian tradition.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
Yeah. I don't know. There's this familiarity in the way we talk about God, as if we know who God is really.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think most people think of God, or just assume that God's name is God. And like we have a very clear picture of what that means. Like it might, we might not even know, we might not be totally conscious of the object that's in our mind when we say the word God. But I think our practice is often much more like a kind of a pagan tribal, like a sense of God is this thing, this being, this whatever, up in heaven, and God will do these things for me if I do these things for God. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but ultimately you can't define God. You can't say.
Yeah, I think most of us have like a very objective sense of who God is, or instrumental, and this suggests that God is not like that.
The way I think about it is like, so you ask the question, who is God? God is.
Yeah.
God is.
Yeah, I think that gets at what's going on here. And I love that it's the being verb. Like, and those verbs are so weird in every language. Like they always they change in strange ways depending on the tense. Like they don't act like any other verb. And I love that that's how God describes the divine being. Is it's close to the heart of being. It is being itself. Like this is existence, and you can't describe it in
consciousness, life. It's transcendent. It's all inclusive. It's inexhaustible. It's unnameable. Yeah.
I am that I am, or I am who I am, I think is a great translation and kind of evokes all of those things.
I define who I am.
Yeah. I just am. Always will be, always have been. And I do this sense that's who their ancestors had worshipped. It's kind of, I think there's something interesting there, because God is both saying, I am more than you can imagine. I am existence itself. Like, I don't have a name, but I am the God your people have always worshipped. So there is like this almost tribal sense of, I'm your God, and you're my people. And also I'm existence itself.
I did reveal myself to Abraham, and
Uh-huh.
I've been working with you all for a while now, and I have a job for you all.
Uh-huh.
It's there's a vocation associated with this, and this very experience that Moses has, and what God tells Moses he's supposed to do, is consistent with what God has revealed, even back to Abraham. You're going to be a nation to bless all nations. Well, what's God doing? He's liberating this people from oppression so they can get back to their job in a sense.
And there's no sense in the book of Exodus that God is at war with the gods of Egypt.
Right.
God
doesn't even mention them.
No, the Egyptian gods, the Egyptian magicians kind of show up and factor in this story, but there's this sense that they're mostly doing magic tricks. And there's no sense in which it's God in competition with someone else's gods. It's just this is God. And if anything, God's at war with the powers that oppress the people God loves.
That's a direct confrontation with political power.
Yep.
I'm going to liberate you from an oppressive regime.
Yeah. I know one of the things you've said is that this makes it clear that God is not a tribal God. And yet there is that sense that it's the tribe of Abraham who belong to this God, or this God belongs to them. And there is this competition, like they're enslaved as a people or as a nation. What do you make of that? Or like, what do you do with that sense?
So Abraham didn't invent that God.
Definitely not. At least not in this
God. God came to Abraham, and I think if you look at like the list of the Egyptian gods, they're all Egyptian names, and each name it's clear that each god has a vocation, a job to do. And it's clear it's a very human system, a way of trying to make sense of all the world and all the forces of the world. But the unique thing about this whole narrative from Genesis into Exodus is God is trying to reveal God's self to humanity. And even with Abraham, it's not, I'm revealing myself so I can be your tribal God. I'm revealing myself to you so you can bless absolutely every tribe, tongue, and nation on this earth. It's a transcendent, it's not a local God, it's a universal God. It's and an unnameable God. And if God can't be named, then nobody has exclusive rights to that God.
Yeah. I think I probably see a little bit of tension here in the Bible itself between that universal impulse, this idea that God is God for everyone, and Abraham is blessed to be a blessing, and this sense that Israel is the special possession of God, or that you could translate that to the Christian tradition as well, the sense that, yes, God loves everyone, but right now God loves Christians the most because they're the ones who are closest. It's associated
with a call and vocation. Israel has a call and vocation. Theoretically, the church, our relationship with God has a mandate to it that's an outward focus. And if
I think there's a way to talk about this that's not harmful.
Right.
The idea that our special relationship with God is for the good of everyone. I think there's also that language of a special relationship to God is still there and still kind of, it's something, I'm not sure you can get around it if you're a religious person.
Yeah, and I think human beings tend to reduce God anyway. We
Yeah, like the temptation is always there.
mhm,
If you to say like I I'm doing this for your own good.
mhm,
Like, and how many times have Christians said that? Like, where God loves you very much,
mhm.
and you need to change in all these ways so that you look more like us because we know a little bit more about God than you do.
I
Like,
worship the true God.
right.
Let me introduce you to the true God.
Yes.
And that is not consistent with what's being revealed here, I don't think.
I think this challenges it.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I would say there's a little bit of that sense here that this is the God that Moses knows best.
Mhm.
And the Egyptians, for whatever reason, don't know or can't know or haven't known.
Here's an
I'm not sure
interesting
what it
thing, though.
is.
I recently taught a series on Proverbs, and I discovered that a lot of the Proverbs are found in Egyptian Proverbs. So there's
Yeah.
there's Egyptian material that makes it
Yeah.
into the Bible.
The Egyptian wisdom tradition is really rich.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's worth pondering. Like, you know, why would God allow Egyptian wisdom, to be preserved in the Hebrew Bible?
Yeah. I actually think Egyptian ideas about the afterlife are as influential in like later Jewish and Christian thinking as anything. And I'm definitely not an expert on Egyptian religiosity, ancient Egyptian religiosity. But it's kind of like an unexplored. It's not often, hasn't often been recognized by Christians how much Egyptian theology informed the Jewish tradition. I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the issue here? The issue isn't, hey, Moses, these Egyptians are worshiping the wrong gods. It's
No, that's not even mentioned.
right. It's
Yeah. They're just being bad.
the
They're
Egyptians
being
are
mean.
oppressing these people, my
Yeah.
people. That's the issue.
They're treating people badly.
Right.
Yeah.
It's,
I think
it's not
yeah.
a religious issue. It's an ethical issue.
Yeah. So do you imagine like the almost the logical extension of this, a logical extension of this, and a question that's not very often asked is, was God doing this in other places at the same time? Was God showing up for other people in exactly the same way? Could God have been doing the same thing for, I mean, the Egyptians aren't the only.
Right. The sad thing is we don't have
Oppressive
a ton of preserved literature from what else was going on in the world at that time.
Yeah. I'm just probably thinking the Christian imagination, as far as I know, the Jewish imagination never really asks that question. Like, this was our experience of God. And we tell it like it was the only story. Sometimes it's important to us that this be the only unique story of how God.
Oh, so the wise men that come to see Jesus, right? Who are they? Well, they're most likely Zoroastrianisms, which is older than Judaism.
Friendly astrologers,
right? Yeah. Right, and what's going? Well, they must have some conscious awareness of God. So
or
much
they're listening in.
And I don't think even that story is really kind of a radical story that that these heretics out here they're paying attention.
Yeah. And it's like an element in the tradition that, for the most part, Christian theologians have just kind of ignored. I totally forgot to turn those lights back on. Sorry. Yeah. And I think that that's an interesting question to me is God liberating other people the same way? I think some 20th century theologians and 21st century theologians would say we have to assume that when people are liberated from oppression, that's God. And when they're crying out, whether they know it or not, they're crying out to the God of this tradition who wants people to be free and healthy and happy.
Yeah, I mean, post this experience after the Exodus, who is God? I'm the one that led you out of Egypt.
Yeah.
It's remember, I'm the God who liberated you from oppression, and you need to behave. That needs to influence how you behave in this world. Remember, don't forget what I did for you, and now you can't oppress foreigners. You can't, don't make that same mistake.
Anything else we want to talk about?
I wish there were a way for us to experience the strangeness of this passage. I don't think any amount of interpretation, talking about it, there is something so visceral about this story that defies talking about it. And to grasp this is the God we worship, and I don't think we know who that God is very well.
You don't think the Exodus, the Charlton Heston version captured it?
I don't know.
No. Maybe someday. Cool. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, thank you, Scott. This has been a great conversation. And thank you to Nick Mandog Smith for producing and editing this show. Thank you to our executive producer, Jay Kennedy. Thank you to the congregation of First Baptist Church of Indianapolis, or where I serve as one of the pastors. Somebody, Jay, asked me last week, is anybody said anything? Is everybody okay with this? And I was like, yeah, it's been totally fine. And
we're getting a few more listeners. We're getting some questions, comments. It's good. And what's the good news for today? We've got listeners in
10 different countries.
Yeah,
we have no idea where they are. Leave a comment.
Yeah.
Let us know where you're listening.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening. Please do remember to rate, review, and subscribe. You can follow us on Instagram at the Unholy Bible Study. And if there's a chapter in the Bible you'd like us to cover soon, you can send us an email at unholybiblestudypodcast@gmail.com. If you have questions, you can send them there too. Next week, we're continuing this mini-series on names and talking about Genesis 17, when God changes the name of Abram. Now, we're probably going to keep talking about this, but you don't have to keep listening.